Forwards, attackers, strikers, it doesn't matter what you call them, they're the most important position to factor in to your plans on draft day, and in this episode, we'll be talking all about them. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official FPL draft. My name is Mitch, and I'm your host for the fourth and final positional roundup in our Road to Draft Day 2024 series, finishing up with the forwards. Now, this position has come up plenty of times already in the previous videos, as I've been urging you to save your draft capital and spend it generously on your strikers. Now, I'll point out at the beginning of this episode that the majority of what I say is going to be largely applicable to average size leagues of between 8 and 10, as these tend to be the most common league sizes out there. Leagues of 6 only have to draft 18 forwards on draft day, so you'd have to really actively go out of your way to end up with a set of really poor forwards that can't do a job for you across the season. In sort of 8, 10 or 12 team leagues, we have to consider up to 36 forwards, and the calibre we have to negotiate gets very low very quickly on draft day. Now, if you do play official FPL draft and you'd like access to all of our draft rankings, you'll be able to find those in the members area at draftfc.co.uk. Not only do you get our rankings, which are updated daily, you get our new optimal goalkeeper pairing tables that I teased in the goalkeeper video, and you also have access to our average draft pick data taken from every single draft league happening every single day around the world. So rather than relying on my rankings or your own rankings, you can also see how every other FPL league is valuing the players as well, to also add in some crowd wisdom to the proceedings and help us plan just that little bit better. From this, we also allow you to see each individual player's draft map, so you can see exactly where they were taken in every single real-life draft league. The number of drafts happening every day is going up exponentially this week, so there'll be more and more data to feed into our tables, and this is data that you will not be able to find anywhere else. We've got loads of other features, many of which are based on our expected points model, which has got a massive AI-boosted upgrade this summer, but most of that becomes relevant after draft day when we're planning for Game Week 1, which will soon come around. The support we've had over the past week or two for the podcast and the YouTube channel has been really positive, and it's always really nice to come across new draft heads to join us for another ride this year. And if, like us, you take your draft league more seriously than you should, consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, or following on whichever podcast platform you're listening to us on, and checking out our social media links, which you'll find in the description below. So let's get this episode moving and review the striker landscape ahead of the upcoming season. So, as we've done for all of this series, I always like to look back before jumping ahead to what might be happening in the upcoming season. Those of you that caught the Defender episode, which is possibly still my favourite episode in this series, if I do say so myself, you'll have seen that last year we saw more goals scored in the Premier League than ever before, a stat which on the face of it should bode very well for the players whose job it is to put the ball in the back of the net. Now, looking back at the data from my own 11-team draft league last year, which I'm able to do thanks to the time capsule functionality of Draft FC, which allowed me to save all of that in the summer. As part of our analytics tab, you can see the breakdown of how each manager was scoring their FPL points. Every season, the bread and butter is minutes played. So the 1 point you get, or the 2 points you get if your player plays more than 60 minutes. So if all your starting 11 score their 2 points every week, you could get 836 points over the season. This varies a bit because with the double game weeks and the blanks, that number's actually slightly different. So you could actually get slightly higher than that. Our average for the league was 784 points from minutes played, which is pretty good. I happen to lead the way on 817 on that metric, which I ought to, considering one of my main responsibilities on here is doing the predicted lineups for you every week. The second highest FPL points income for any manager after this is goals. Last year, at least, the number of points you'd expect to get from goals that your team was scoring was about double the number of points we were getting from clean sheets. So crudely, this means investing in a player that might score held about twice as much value as one that could keep a clean sheet, or a defender who could keep a clean sheet. The average number of FPL points we scored from goals last season was about 351 in our league, but that involves defenders too. As a little aside, the correlation between those minutes points and points from goals correlates very well with the final league table in our league. I had to look at a couple of others, and it seems to be the case in those too. So we want players who play, we want players who score goals. Sounds like we're in the right podcast already. Now, last year, there were, I'd say, 8 very much standout strikers in the FPL landscape, and they're probably not going to be hugely surprising to you who those names were. If we look at the season as a whole, there were 6 strikers who managed to finish up with non-penalty expected goal involvements of greater than 20. So those were Erling Haaland, who led the way, Ollie Watkins, Isak, Solanke, Nico Jackson, and Darwin Nunez, who always has to serve as a reminder that underlying stats are not actual stats, and we don't get any FPL points for a player simply getting good chances. If we just hone in on the latter half of the season, so from game week 20 onwards, Haaland, Isak, Watkins, Nico Jackson and Solanke all remain on the list for goal involvements expected above 10. We also then introduce Havertz and Mateta as a recognition of their late season form. Darwin Nunez is the only player that then sort of falls out of that list, as his back half output was just ever so slightly below 10 for those games, but I think we can let him stay in the club for now. Now, some of the players on this list don't need a huge amount of discussion or explaining, and I'm sure you're going to be quite capable of slotting them into your own draft day rankings, but there are a couple who I want to touch on now. And the first one is Ollie Watkins for Aston Villa. If we look at him over the last 4 seasons now, he's averaging over 175 FPL points per year, which is phenomenal and puts him right in that upper echelon of FPL assets. 37 attacking returns last year in the league for Aston Villa, and managed to start 37 of the 38 Premier League games. So a very, very reliable performer. As it stands, he's my number 2 forward in the Draft FC player rankings. How high is he on your overall draft board, though, is the question. There is a whole clutch of players who fall into that 3, 4, 5, 6 category. Not all forwards, I have to say, that could very much go either way. And if we look at our data in terms of average draft positions so far, clearly there is a lot of variability in where managers are putting him in that bracket, and it could be a huge decision for your final season outcome. The next striker I want to talk about is Jean-Philippe Mateta. Now, in the midfielder pod, I focused on the surprise package of the season that was Cole Palmer and asked you if he could do it again this year. While on a very different level, the transformation we saw in Mateta in the back half of last season, I think, was just as revolutionary. The change can very much be pinpointed to the introduction of new manager Glasner at Crystal Palace when he came in February. Up to that point in the season, Mateta was averaging about 0.16 goal involvements per game. That's pretty much defender territory. After the arrival of Glasner, this rocketed to 0.64 goal involvements per game, scoring just under 8 FPL points per appearance. His underlying stats suggest he overperformed based on the chances he did receive, and given the Mateta that we got to know in the preceding years, this probably doesn't mean we grade him the same as Heung-min Son, who we're very used to overperforming his underlying stats. As I say, we're very accustomed to that. If he can continue at even 75% of this form, he's going to be a formidable striker to pick up on draft day, but there does still remain a question mark. Palace as a team were also transformational under Glasner towards the back end of last season, and a lot of those factors remain heading into the new season, but not all of them. Michael Olise put up an expected goal involvement of 0.83 per 90 in the 8 league appearances under Glasner, which if he could put up over a season, very much put him in the 200-point club. He has, of course, now left and gone to Bayern Munich. The other key piece of the jigsaw was and is Eberechi Eze, who had 0.76 goal involvements per 90 for the same period. Strong rumours remain, though, that Palace could also cash in on Eze, and so appraising Mateta's value at this stage is very murky, and ultimately, if Eze did leave, would see him tumble down our draft boards. I'll tell you now, he's currently averaging 8th highest forward according to our global draft data, and is currently my 8th forward too. He is somebody I can't help but root for generally, and so I do hope he continues to do well. If you have him slightly lower in your own rankings, I'd understand it, and I think it comes down to a judgment call on Crystal Palace's fortunes as a collective heading into the new season. So, looking ahead to draft day, I've mentioned it already in, as I said, probably every one of the positional forward pods that have been out over the last week or so. For the first few rounds, we have to focus on the forwards. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't like being too prescriptive over which positions or how many of those positions to take by which point in the draft. But I think having some guidelines will help, particularly newer draft managers who could even be going into their first draft day this season. For those who are very seasoned veterans of draft day, you'll know kind of how to play the board as it comes and won't get quite so panicked or sent down a dead end in terms of your squad makeup. But generally speaking, I think if you're in average size leagues, you should aim to have 2 forwards picked up by round 4 and possibly even all 3 of them picked up by round 5. In larger leagues, this changes a little bit. I would still aim for 2 by round 4. But if you think about it, in a 16-team league, by the time round 4's finished, 64 players have gone off the board. So, if you end up leaving your second or even third strikers till well down the list, you're not going to have a lot to rely on for the rest of the season. I think for those larger leagues, though, because there is such a drop-off in quality after the opening sort of 2 dozen strikers, it's more of a judgment call when you would pick up your third forward, because if the actual calibre of forwards left are all much and pretty much bench fodder, then you may just want to focus your efforts elsewhere, and that would be the right thing to do. Just to hammer the point home even further, I've kind of built on some of the ideas that I used in the previous episode where I went through a mock draft for an 8-team league. So for those listening on the audio, don't worry, there isn't really much you're missing here on the visuals other than a still image, which I would encourage you, if you just go in your show notes, you'll be able to click that and open it to follow along as well if you're not watching on the video. But what I've got here is just the opening 10 rounds of a completely made up 8-team draft, just highlighting the positions, which I've loosely based on my own rankings, but to be honest, once it got past round 5, I was making it up a little bit. What you'll be able to see is a large concentration of forwards in the opening 4 rounds. So in fact, in this completely made up scenario, I've made it so that every single one of the 8 managers had 2 forwards in place by the end of round 4. So I think everybody gets a pass on that basis. What I've done just to highlight things and put a fine point on it is just one manager, which is manager number 3, picked up his 3rd forward in the 5th round. And so he's the only one who basically did followed the advice that I said just a moment ago, which is to try and have your 3 forward spots picked out by the end of round 5. Now, by doing this, manager number 3 in this scenario picked a midfielder in the opening round. So it isn't like he got one of the big boys, but he's come away from the draft with the 6th best, 8th best, and 17th best forwards on the board, which are 3 very good and very serviceable strikers to go into the season with, and means that he's got the flexibility of being able to play a 3-4-3 at times, so long as they're all fit and healthy. So if I was purely reviewing one of your mock drafts or one of your actual drafts, and this was the kind of board that I was presented with, I would instantly hone in on that 3rd manager, and that's the team, even not knowing who the actual personnel names are, would be the team I would want to manage if I was taking over one of these draft teams, not knowing anything else about the other players that they've drafted. But let's get into some individual players and their rankings. So as I've already given you Mateta's numbers, I'm just going to highlight 4 more forwards across my draft board that I think are of particular interest. One other thing I'll say is that for our Draft FC rankings, I try to keep a ranking of the top 240 players because I've got 16 team leagues in mind. And so within that, I have 48 forwards ranked. So that means some of these strikers will be well off your draft board because you're not going to be getting anywhere near having to go that low on the draft board on your draft day. There's one at the end who I think is a particularly interesting one that I'll cover anyway. And a general thing I'd say is, as I see the rankings, there are a clear top 6 forwards that have to go in rounds 1 and 2. I think there are another clutch of 4 who would comfortably come in around late round 2, round 3, and then a much more amorphous group of around a dozen strikers that will come soon after this. But anyway, as you can see, the first one I'm going to talk about is Nico Jackson for Chelsea. He's currently in at 17 in my overall rankings and at number 7 just ranking the forward players. Rather surprisingly to me, his total XG last season was around 20, which was second only to Erling Haaland. Obviously, there was some underperformance of his expected stats there. That could just be because he's not very good. That could be potential for growth this year. The main risk I see to him is that Chelsea go and sign a big marquee number 9. There have been some rumours out there that don't seem the most solid, but obviously if they did, then Jackson would quickly become a bench player. But say any of you out there who favour the eye test over statistics may rightly have him slightly lower in your rankings. Next is Jamie Vardy, blast from the past. Currently, I've got him at 50th overall, and he's my 18th forward in the rankings. In the Championship last year, his underlying stats were really good, 0.91 goals per 90, but he did only play just under 1,800 league minutes for the season. And also, if we rewind the clock to the season before, when they were last in the Premier League, a very underwhelming Premier League campaign for Vardy that year. Reports are, as it stands, that he is the first choice striker under Steve Cooper, and he could be a really excellent third forward to pick up in the middle rounds of the draft. Next is Chris Wood, who I've got just below at 57 currently, which that ordering between Vardy and Wood, I've got no doubt a lot of rankings and a lot of lists out there will have the other way around. As I say, he's currently 19th in my forwards. For me, it's just the looming threat of Awoniyi in the squad that makes Wood a minute's risk. I've got no doubt that he's a decent striker, but I just still think Awoniyi is a better player. I thought that the season before last, obviously he's had his injury problems. They've got kind of the first time to have a fresh pre-season and a good start under Nuno, so we'll see who gets favoured, but that's the only reason I've got him lower. If I knew Chris Wood was the Forest number 9 and would play 70 minutes every week, he would probably be 20 spots higher, maybe even 25, 30 spots higher in my draft rankings, because he is a very reliable performer. I think too many teams, too many managers will end up with Wood as their forward 2 on draft day. And for me, having one forward and then Wood as your backup for the whole season could leave you just a little bit short at times. And if Wood is your second forward, then your third forward is going to be right down the rankings. And the final player is Deniz Undav, who could be, I think, one of the most undervalued players in the game. Currently got him at 108th in my overall rankings and 31st in my forward rankings. So if you're in a league of 10, he may just fall outside of your radar, but maybe I could convince you to pull him in as a really late third forward pickup. So he is probably one of my biggest big league late round potential bargain tips. If you're in a league of 14, 15, 16, then the likes of Undav are going to appear on the draft board. And I think if you're the sort of person who can highlight players like this, particularly in like a 16-team league, for example, just to take a massive, go to one end of the spectrum, picking up someone like Undav in the 7th or 8th round could be a real bargain and could leave you with 3 forwards that set you up really nicely for the season, knowing that there's always going to be a decent stream of defenders and mids to pick up off the waivers. Last year, he was on loan at Stuttgart in the Bundesliga and finished up with 18 goals and 10 assists, and that was off an XG of 17, so he performed exactly as he should have done. Just over 2,000 minutes, and incredibly, his non-penalty expected goal involvements per 90 was, let's call it 1, 0.99, let's call it 1. So every single full 90 minutes that he played, he was getting a goal involvement. Now, it appears he's going to be staying at Brighton this season. The reports were that Stuttgart offered about £25 million or about 30 million euros to Brighton to bring Undav back on a permanent basis. Now, that would have been Stuttgart's all-time record transfer fee, so they weren't messing around, and they were prepared to stake a large chunk of their financial fortune on Undav and bringing his services to them permanently. Now, we know from recent years that Brighton have certainly not been afraid to cash in on their stars. It's practically baked into their business model, so you'd have to assume it was on the new manager's rider when he arrived, and I wonder if he ends up seeing more of the pitch than Welbeck and Ferguson this season. Obviously, Hürzeler is German. He was managing in the German second division last year and got his team promoted, so he'd have been well aware of Undav from watching whatever the German version of Match of the Day is. And yeah, it could be a really exciting season. If he can get anywhere near that, if Undav can play regularly for Brighton and get about half of that output, he would be a really good forward 3 pickup for the larger leagues. So that's it for this episode and rounds off our positional episodes with the strikers. Now, probably one of the shorter episodes, and that's really because there just aren't that many strikers to talk about. And if I talked about all of them, I'd give away all of our juicy draft rankings. So remember, if you want to see all of them, then head over to draftfc.co.uk, sign up, make sure you get a pre-season pack, and you'll have instant access to the draft room, which shows you all of our rankings the average global picks, as I said, and also each player's individual draft map. The other thing that we added yesterday was the goalkeeper rotation table, which I mentioned in the goalkeeper episode 2. What that does is show you, according to our expected points model, which got a nice AI boost this year, we plotted out every goalkeeper and how many points we expect them to get from game week 1 to game week 38. And then what we do is we work out what the optimal pairings would be if you were to perfectly alternate those keepers all season. So we do it if you perfectly alternate them, if you do it terribly, and then an average of the two. What you're meant to do with that table on draft day is essentially highlight some of the keepers that you like the look of. Once you've picked your first one, you can then refer to that table to look at who the best fits are in terms of a rotating pair and just be led by that, really. Obviously, these numbers are based on predictions many, many months, virtually a year away from now, so that, they are just a guide, but I think they're as good a guide as you can get in terms of coming up with a nice goalkeeping duo that rotate nicely for the entire season, and then you can sit back and not have to worry about your goalkeepers for the rest of the year. If you've got this far on the episode and you're watching on YouTube, make sure you've hit the subscribe button and given us a thumbs up to show your appreciation. I will reply to every single comment that gets left on these videos and episodes, so if there's anything you want to reach out for, you're happy for everyone to see and read it, then please feel free to comment below. If you'd rather DM me about something a bit longer or a bit more specific or a bit more boring, the easiest place is on X. Give us a follow at draft_FC, and again, I'll respond to any and all messages that come through on there to do with draft, Premier League, football, the website, anything you want. I'm usually pretty quick to respond. The final thing just to mention again quickly is that if you are already a member at Draft FC, do check out the Refer a Friend feature. If you do refer a friend and they sign up using your link that you send them, then you will get £5 credited into your Draft FC account, which will come off future subscriptions. We gave that a big boost this summer to make it worth your while to consider doing that. I know many of you won't be keen to share our insights with those within your draft league, but you may know people at work or have family members who play in draft leagues that don't involve yourself, who you think could also use a helping hand. And not only do you get the £5, but they get 50% off the subscription too. So I'm going to leave things there for the forwards. We're into August now, so I know lots of you will have your draft days looming, and many of you could have already had your draft days. And I'm always keen to see real life draft boards and rating teams and things. So feel free to share some of those with us too. There will be more episodes out before the season kicks off. I haven't decided exactly what they're going to be yet, because there's probably only going to be time for another 2 or 3 episodes, and I want to make sure we get the most value we can from those. But come the weekend, the first of the next batch of episodes will be with you, still on the road to Draft Day 2024 series. So it's all going to be geared towards Draft Day and geared towards helping you assemble a squad you can be pleased with and a squad that sets you up for success come May. So that'll do for now. Best of luck with your planning, and as always, stay shook.